And I'd just like to introduce our wonderful speaker, Ben Watts. So he is the CEO at What's Next, one of our strategic alliance partners, as mentioned. He has over 20 years experience managing large teams and multi-sites across ASX-listed cooperatives in a variety of industries. He is passionate about applying corporate thinking and practices to SMEs, driving people performance, and ultimately creating high performance workplaces. With the challenges of hybrid working, it is so important, or is more important than ever, to build a sustainable culture. So we're excited to have Ben's expertise today. So please welcome Ben. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Liv. So today, just going to talk a bit about culture, and more specifically sustainable culture, and how to sustain that culture moving forward. It's one of those areas that's quite grey in business. People talk about it a lot, but you ask 100 different business owners what culture is and you'll probably get about 95 different answers. So what we've tried to do here is break it down into some usable bits where we can actually define what culture is, and then also then measure it after we've defined that. So here we go. This is a little bit about us. We're an external HR team, so we basically provide HR services to small to medium businesses. We've created our business a bit like a corporate HR department. You would see in a big corporate, and we supply those services out to small to medium businesses. Usually growing businesses, we take a very commercial approach. So we look at how we can get the best out of our teams and out of our people in business, and we really stand in the business owner's shoes, being a small business ourselves. We say we work from the lunchroom to the boardroom, and we've got offices in Gold Coast, Brisbane, and over in New York as well. So a bit about today, what I was going to cover. I usually cover off on what we're sort of seeing in the market. We're in a pretty unique space where we work across all industries, and we work with a lot of small businesses. So just to get a bit of a pulse check of what's sort of happening in the small business world. I'm going to talk about how I define a sustainable culture, and we break it down into 3 different pillars that hopefully we can all relate to and measure moving forward. And there's a bit of an activity there. You might have seen, hopefully it was sent around and maybe attached to your meeting invites, but there should be a self-audit sheet that was sent around as well. 2 sheets, I think, that you can take away as well and use. So we'll do a bit of an activity there and then just ask some questions and summarise what we've talked about. So what we're seeing in the market at the moment, I've just got back from the US, and hybrid working is really on everyone's tip of everyone's tongue. Over there, specifically in North America, it really is there to stay. There's office blocks changing the way that they've got their layouts, knocking down walls on offices. In New York itself, there is nowhere near as many business people in Wall Street. I was in Chicago recently, and I thought it was a public holiday. There was no one walking around the streets, no business people. This hybrid working is something that's really happening all over the world. It really adds a lot of pressure to managers in managing people that aren't right in front of them. So they're businesses that have got green middle management. When you go into hybrid working, it just makes it a lot harder again. The landscape for small business is tough. There's obviously wage pressure at the moment. We've had a federal election here in Australia. Labor's coming in. There's going to be some changes there in time. Nothing's come forward as yet, but there will be some IR changes in time with a Labor federal government. Minimum wage has gone up 5.2%. That's flowed through all the awards. That's put further wage pressure on small business. And then the supply and demand of actually finding good people. There's I'm not sure if anyone who's recruited in the last 6 to 12 months, it's tough. It's tough to find good talent. Big corporates are trying to get talent. They're trying to pay to get talent out of small business into their organisations as well. So supply and demand, wage pressure, change in election. It's a really tough environment for small business at the moment. So what I want to focus on today is how do we focus on culture and compete against some of these big corporates and really retain our good talent that we've got? Because retention is something as small businesses we really need to focus on. Attracting people in is one thing, but really retaining them is important. And I think that's where culture plays a really important role. So if we look at our client base, about 85% of our clients come to us and they really want to improve their culture and their performance of their people. And so we spend a lot of time trying to break down what does that mean for small businesses, and how do we actually, go about doing that, putting a plan into place. So the way I break down culture is I break it into 2 different parts, into surface culture and sustainable culture. Now, I think we'll all be familiar with surface culture. A surface culture is all of those things like, drinks on a Friday night, gifts, great ergonomic offices and beautiful workspaces, money, bonuses, cars, all those sort of things that you can see on the surface that attract someone into a business. Great office spaces, views, all these beautiful things, car parks that we can provide on the top. But very much those things that you can look at all of these things, a lot of them are more related about being in an office. So if you're not in an office, a lot of these things aren't as powerful. Surface culture is extremely important. And you would see in the whole Silicon Valley side of things, beer taps and all these great things they do to attract people into a business. If you've ever seen what Google's offices look like, there's all sorts of fun and games there to attract people into a business for a long period of time. But when people aren't in an office, it really makes it a lot harder. Extremely important part of culture. And I think it's I estimate it to be about 20% you should be focusing on that surface stuff to attract people in. Definitely important part. But if you're just relying on this, it's actually really difficult to compete. So what we talk about in our business is sustainable culture. How do we first define our own culture, and then how do we sustain it moving forward? This is a huge part of retaining the employees that you have in the business. So the way that I define it is we break it down into 3 pillars. So there's a strategic pillar, HR strategy. There's the employee performance framework. So that is the frameworks or HR frameworks that are in place that drive performance and continue improvement in your business. And then there's management action. So that's all about dealing with things that happen at the time. It can be a little bit reactive, but it's dealing with things that are happening right then and right now. So they're the 3 different pillars that we look at when we're talking about sustaining our culture on a long-term basis. So I'll break them down into some parts here. So pillar 1, the HR strategy. I'm sure all of you are doing parts of all of these things well, but let's go through them all and break it down. So the HR strategic pillar, I think, is made of 4 different areas. We've got the vision, mission, values, the functional structure, the clear roles with outcome-focused roles, and then anonymous surveys. And I'll talk about these all a little bit deeper. But these are the 4 components of what we call the strategic pillar of culture. So vision, mission, values, I think you'll all be quite familiar with. I'm sure most of your business owners have already got this in place, but the vision is really where you're driving your business towards. It's an aspirational direction that you're heading in. It's what you bring out around the boardroom table. You talk about as to make business decisions. It keeps you straight and focused on the future, and it's quite aspirational. Your mission or your purpose is much more of an emotive feeling. It is how you connect your people to your business. So it's really what your biggest flow onto the world is. It's what you're doing for your customers, how you're affecting the community and the world through your business. It's quite emotive. And then your values are really your behaviors that you really want everyone to be working to, those behaviors that you want people to be portraying when you're not there. And also they should be quite aspirational as well. Things you want people to do may not necessarily be things that you're good at. So they should be things you're striving to be good at. And it's a framework to put across your values. So your vision is what you use for the business and to keep you in a straight direction. Your mission is how you connect your people to the business. It's your why. It's why you're in business in the first place. And then your values are those behaviors that you want everyone portraying, and you want your managers to be using as tools and measuring people through that framework. So vision, mission, values, I'm sure everyone knows about them. They're very important, and they play a large role in sustaining your culture. Functional structure is really about, I look at structure as not being about hierarchy, but being around business function. So we have operations, we have sales, we have marketing, we have very clear business functions in the business. A lot of small businesses, we all do a bit of everything, right? And share some of these different functions. But as you grow, creating the functional structure is super important, so you can make people accountable for those functions within your business. The more things people share, the harder it is to make people accountable. So making your clear functional structure really, really important as you grow into it. And then connecting outcome-based roles to that functional structure. So each of those roles within your structure should be outcome-focused. They should have clear outcomes. We call them the 3 big rocks that you focus towards, and that the individual knows what a good day looks like. They know exactly what success looks like in that role. And you can see the functional structure and the roles, that design should be designed prior to anyone sort of impacting back into it. So we don't build these things around individuals, but we build them for the business moving forward, and having clear outcomes to achieve for each of those roles. And then the one that a lot of people miss here is that anonymous survey. And that's really about getting the information from your team that you don't know. So it's about finding the blind spots we have as business owners. Really important to be doing this at least once a year, and just getting a bit of a pulse check, a bit of a feel if you're missing anything, or your leaders or your managers aren't giving you the right story that you need to be hearing. So an anonymous survey really does close the loop on your strategy, make sure there's no blind spots there. So this first pillar, that strategic pillar, is vision, mission, values, functional structure, clear outcome-based roles, and then anonymous survey to close that loop. So this is what we call the HR strategic pillar. So pillar 2 is the employee performance framework. And let's break that down into some separate parts here. So again, 4 components of this pillar, and this is all around performance and getting the best performance out of the people within your business. Now, the onboarding, we talk about this needing to be consistent, and really getting a clear understanding of what the strategy is, understanding your vision, mission, values, your structure, and the roles within the business, but getting the same for every person coming into the team. So you need all of your managers onboarding your new team members in the same consistent manner, getting the same messages and understanding the strategy of your business, but being clear and deliberate about that onboarding process. Probation is probably it's the worst name for anything. It's probably the most underutilized HR framework there is. Most small business owners don't utilize this correctly, but really through that first 6 months that someone comes into a business, they should be managed either up or out throughout that process throughout that 6 months. So best practice for that is really a 1-3-5, we call it. So the first month, third month, fifth month, having a mini performance review, but really a two-way conversation with these individuals and assessing how they're going, asking them what they need to perform, but doing some really deliberate catch-ups at least 3 times throughout a probation period, where you're managing that person either up or out before you've paid them for 6 months and you don't want them to continue. So again, really underutilized in the small business world. And then one-on-ones too. And look, most business owners say to me, we catch up all the time. We don't need a formal one-on-one, but one-on-ones are a really important way to close the loop with individuals. Really important way to give quick, fast feedback that can be changed or they can take on within a short period of time. So we ask for one-on-ones to be done at least fortnightly with direct managers. Extremely important when you're working in a hybrid workplace. All of these things they become more important in a hybrid example, but one-on-ones should be done at least fortnightly to close the loop from a workflow and development perspective with the individual. And then there's performance reviews. So again, best practice is multiple times in a year. We always look at this as if it was a football game, say you're a football coach and someone performed badly in round 2, like you wouldn't wait to the end of the season to let them know that they performed badly in round 2, because it hasn't given them the chance then to improve and then improve for those other games moving forward. And performance reviews are very much like that. They should be done more than once a year, but they should also work in conjunction with some of these other frameworks in place as well to get the ultimate performance out of an individual. So this second pillar, employment performance framework, is all about consistent, strong, strategic onboarding, same for every individual, really well managed first 6 months of their employment, one-on-ones happening on a regular basis, and performance reviews then to close that out as a total pillar. We'll just look at some of the way that should work in an employment framework lifecycle. We've got the onboarding, of course, starting first. Then we're really focusing in on that probation, which is that 3 performance reviews over that first 6 months. We then move to the one-on-ones where we're doing them every 2 weeks, and they're much faster, quick, but we're keeping that contact with the individuals. And then the performance reviews at least twice a year from a small business perspective. Best practice is probably 4 times, but it might be an overkill in small business if we're doing these other things as well. So this is the employment performance framework, the second pillar of a sustainable culture. And pillar number 3, equally as important. These are all equally weighted, 33% each. is management action. So this one's a little bit more reactive. This is what's happening right here and right now. Again, as business owners, we all do it. We sometimes put our head in the sand and we don't deal with things as they come up. Sometimes we don't deal with things the same for individuals as they come up as well. So really timely action when things occur. If there's a performance issue, if there's poor behavior, if there's any little incident that comes up, really acting on that straight away, regardless of what person has caused that to happen. But timely action for these things that occur from a management on a day-to-day basis. Keeping it really consistent, so the same thing happens for every person. You know, just because someone's your best salesperson in the business, they should be treated exactly the same as if they're someone, you know, in an administrative role. Consistent from all of your managers in acting timely and consistent. The third component of the management action is noting and filing. This is very HR-y, but if you want to action things in the future, maybe in a termination, maybe you get taken to Fair Work or anything like this, if things weren't noted and filed, you can't actually use them in those examples. So anything verbal really should be put into a text message, a file note, written in a book somewhere, but noting some of these actions along the way is super, super important. Oops, sorry about that. And then, of course, closing the loop on whatever happens as well. So we need to go back to them around an incident. We have to go back and close that loop up as well. So timely action, consistent action, noting and filing it down, and then going back around. So if we've set an expectation, we need to go back around to see if that expectation has actually occurred. So this is really, really important. And again, something that we see that can change culture very quickly is inconsistency, things not handled in a timely manner. And this process, you know, putting your head in the sand and not actually dealing with it becomes an issue and really can affect your culture in a negative way. But of course, handled really well can be a really positive way as well. So that's the third pillar that we talk about. So this is just a form that I've just sent you guys to have a look at. They should be attached to the meeting invite. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but it basically gives you a bit of an idea of how to manage things as they come up. How do we prevent and how do we do that action along the way? It's great to sit down with your managers and go through. It's a bit of a guidance. It's how to close down issues quickly, or what needs to be done to formally deal with them as they get more serious along the way. Have a look at it. Happy to answer any questions around that down the track. It's more just a resource to take away. So they're the three pillars. So from a sustainable culture perspective, we talked earlier about the surface culture, extremely important, not brushing that aside at all. But if you really want to improve the culture that you've got in your business and sustain it long term, we need to define it first. And we think this is a way that you can define it, because then once it's defined, you can measure it. So it's a great thing to sit down with your managers and talk through. Just to quickly go back over those three pillars. Number one is that HR strategy, the vision, mission, values. Super important to have in place and to reconnect to as a business owner from time to time as well. These can evolve and change over time as your business does. And it's not just good for you to have in your cupboard as well. It's great to then speak to your managers about this, measure your team on this, that they understand it. Bring this into things like performance reviews. Are your team, are they living the values and the behaviours that you've put into place? So really keep it alive. Vision, mission, values, functional, clear structure should be that way now, but also to grow into. Clearly outcome-focused job descriptions or outcome profiles, what we call them, really, really important, so people know how to perform in your role and people should come and go from that role. And then closing the loop there as well with anonymous surveys. Employee performance framework, we went through all of those as well. It's extremely important to develop your individuals within the team and have these things in place and keep them, all four of them, in place as well. And then the quick management action. So they're the three different pillars, equally weighted. So I've got a bit of an activity. Hopefully you guys have got that form in front of you, but if you don't, we've got it up here on the screen. So what we've given out here as part of this presentation is a sustainable culture self-audit. So it's just an activity that, whether you have a look at it now or you have a look at it later with the managers, it's just a really quick way of assessing where you're sitting from a self-audit perspective. So there's 3 different pillars, as we've talked about, 4 different components. So you give yourself a score out of 4 for each one of the pillars. And then you give yourself a score out of 12 overall for that sustainable culture. It'd be interesting to see how you go. I'm not sure if anyone wants to talk about what their number is, but if you've got 10 or below, it's giving you some guidance there of where you should be aiming then to develop. And if you really want to retain and your team that you've got now, that great talent you've got internally, this is a way to really manage your culture moving forward. I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions around this self-audit activity itself or any of the 3 pillars.
Hey, you guys are welcome to jump in. This is just a little bit of an interactive with Ben. So please have a chat about what your audit looks like, and let's hear some examples.
See if anyone's brave enough to tell us what their strengths and weaknesses are across this 12.
Hey,
what we
Ben,
find.
I'll just jump in there, mate. John Hollenberg here.
Hey, John.
I think there was actually a question in the chat as well from Ronnie, more around the anonymous surveys. Have you got any examples of that or anything you bring up on screen?
Not on screen. I'm happy to talk it through with you.
Yeah, of course.
The way that we usually look at that is we have some quite. We've been doing these now for probably 15 years, and you build some I suppose understanding in different industries on what's good, bad, and indifferent across these anonymous surveys, but really asking things. It's a lot of self-scoring. So self-scoring around things like morale, self-scoring about your own personal job satisfaction, net promoter score. So would you say to your next door neighbor, come and work for me? Those sort of things. And it gives us a bit of a benchmark thinking of where the rest of the team sit. We ask some interesting questions around how long you see yourself working for the business. And we get some really interesting answers out of that. So we give the options of 0 to 1 year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, or 5+, or undecided. Now, the results of that really help you from a understanding of where your team's sitting. So if you've got and we've had this before, you've got 80% of your guys sitting in 0 to 1 year, they've already decided that they're moving on, right? So that's a really bad position to be in.
You've got problems in your life.
You've got issues, yeah, you've got issues. But even if you've got everyone sitting in undecided, you've got an opportunity then to build your culture out and get them to decide to stay on a longer term basis. So there's opportunity from undecided. If you've got everyone sitting in 5 years plus, it's equally as concerning in my book, is that you've got potentially a whole lot of people cruising along and not necessarily the right balance of people that you want within your team too. So you get some great information from that. We ask around some different things like onboarding, performance, what people are motivated by. There's a lot of written questions in there as well. We often do a message in the bottle to the CEO, which is actually quite an interesting question. But you get a really good pulse check from a survey like that. And often you are surprised by the results, because most business owners think they know, but they get that and they're like, oh, okay, I've got some data here to tell me that I might have a few blind spots.
And sorry, did you say frequency on that? Is that a monthly or quarterly?
No, I do that in a 12-month basis. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a few clients we've got do it every 6 months, but I think that's probably an overkill unless you've got issues you really want to improve quickly. I think 12 months as a bit of a pulse check is a really good balance to put into your the year's activities.
Could you do a more condensed version on a monthly, just to catch any little niggles? Like you said, by the time 12 months has gone by, a bunch of time's passed. Can you do it in a shorter frequency, but make it more, accessible or efficient?
Definitely, yeah, you definitely can. Look, there's a lot of things out there. Office Vibe. There's a lot of different applications to be doing that sort of work. I personally don't think it should be done that often. Reason being is it gets a bit blasé. People get a bit to skip over it when it's monthly. If you look at these other things we've got in place around these one-on-ones on a fortnightly basis, probation managed really well, and then performance review framework in there as well, that you've got your managers actively working through, you shouldn't really have any surprises. The anonymous one for me is more the blind spots that you don't get from that other best practice.
Love it. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Any other questions about this specifically, guys? Any around your scores?
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, Benny, when we're in that probation period and we clearly understand that one of our candidates may not make it through the probation, and I think you termed it managing them up or out, really keen to hear some terminology or verbiage around how that's handled, and then obviously how's that viewed in an IR sense as well.
Yeah, so it's the easiest time period to get rid of someone in your business, and I'm saying that in a harsh way, but in a business owner needs to know that. Utilizing that probation period is the time where you have the most protection about moving someone on. You go one day over that and you get the full IR bucket thrown at you, right? So it's really hard if you go outside of that. In saying that, you've got to be pretty careful in the way it's managed. It's usually on a less is more basis is the way we look at it. We like people to say things like, you're not a fit for the business, even though there might be other reasons behind it. You have to be really careful of what we call general protections, which is an uncapped fair work scenario where if you go against one of the protected attributes, so if you were discriminated or did something in that period of time, the general protections would still would be open. So you've got to be really, really careful of that. But you do have the ability to say, you're just not a good fit for the business. We've decided that we're not going to continue your probation period.
And how much justification do you need to give them? Any?
No.
You can just say
less
that.
Is more.
That's it. Yeah.
Less is more. We have lots of scenarios, and I could think of probably a dozen that's happened in the last couple of months with clients. But there's things like someone hasn't been coming in, like they've had a lot of sick leave, for instance. Like you've got to be really careful. So if someone has some type of medical scenario where they have a whole lot of sick leave in their probation period, and you then can link it, that they can link it to that, then that's a protected attribute. You can't say, we're getting rid of you because you've been sick. Even performance-wise, you can get caught if you haven't followed a process or given them an opportunity to improve. So
in probation?
There is some case law out there where that's been the case. You'd have to mess it up pretty bad, to be honest, but you can do it. So it's best just to say you're not a good fit for the business. But trying to, there's things like they've found out someone's pregnant, but they actually aren't working out in the business. Like there's become some dangerous scenarios. So I don't want people just to go, it's free for all in probation period. It's not. But it's your safest period of time to get someone out if you don't think they're going to be a good fit. And you don't want to leave it to the last minute, because then they can be pushed back and they can, all of a sudden you've flipped over the 6 months and you're in a much more difficult situation. But yeah, best to get a bit of guidance. Happy to take a call prior to you doing it, just to make sure you're on the right track, because it really comes down to process.
Yeah.
But you don't want to waste that period of time.
Yeah.
But I really want people to think about it as, we don't just let them go for 6 months and see how we go. Let's make a call at just under 6 months. It's how are you going at 1 month, how are you going at 3 months, and how are you going at 5? And really, you shouldn't, if it's managed well, you shouldn't even get to 5 if someone's going to go, right? Someone should be managed much quicker than that. And we're not very good at that as business owners, because especially in a market where it's really hard to find people, we unfortunately, sometimes we err on the side of they might come good over time. But if you manage them properly and you're using this best practice framework, you shouldn't get that far.
Yeah, appreciate it, Benny. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Anyone else got anything around these 3 different pillars?
Ben, what's a good example of, I guess, a best practice onboarding framework? I think it's a fairly generic sort of reference there. What's a good example?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's lots of different versions. What I really like to focus on is that there's some type of message coming from a business owner, from a vision, mission, values perspective. So I always like to have a casual catch up with the individual, and as a business owner, I'll do that first up. We'll go off site, we'll have a coffee, we'll sit there and talk about what we're all about. I usually present to them our vision, mission, values. So some sort of business owner touch point, whether it's on video if you're bigger, or it's one-to-one. Really, really important to have that aspect, and that gets missed a lot, especially when we're going through the day-to-day sort of work. And there's a lot of different ways to do that if you can't do it in person, but that's one aspect. There's the general familiarity of what's going on, making people feel comfortable. Really explaining some of those basics of how we apply for leave, how we work in a hybrid scenario, what our expectations are, those sort of generic high level things. And then I like to do a lot of shadowing with ideally everyone in or every different function of the business, but that's sometimes difficult, but super important if you can get it done. But then shadowing with their manager for a period of time or a peer is the way I like to break it down. But there's lots of different versions of that, right? You can bring in policies, you can bring in, there's lots of different versions of that.
Thanks.
But the key I think with onboarding is consistency. Because, you know, sometimes when we've got a bit of, you know, sometimes someone starts and we've got a bit of time, we'll do it really well. And then under pressure at another time of the year, we'll do it really badly. So consistency, especially if you've got multiple managers doing it. So the managers understand the importance of, yeah, we've found this person that took ages and we've got them here. But it's only just beginning now, right? We want them now to come in, understand us, get to know us, and be a weapon for us as we move forward. We don't want them jumping for a bit more money in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes.
But a big,
Thanks.
important part of culture is that onboarding aspect. So yeah, really important aspect of that employee performance framework section. Cool. I'll just flick through a bit of a summary. There's not a lot more to step through, so happy to answer questions at the end as well, guys, and especially general ones. But I really, if you can take this away, sit down with your team and just have a think about it. Just go through and just see how you score in those 3 different pillars. Weight them all evenly and give yourself a score out of 12. You know, and anything 10 or less, you've just got a few things in there to focus on. But it gives you a bit of a roadmap, I suppose, to develop over the rest of the year and to look at. So that's the equation, we call it. It's the strategy, the frameworks, and the action, the 3 equal components. And we need to really give them thought, all 3 of them, to really sustain that culture ongoing. So really, in summary, this hybrid headache, as I call it, is something that's not going anywhere. It's definitely what we're seeing in North America, and they usually lead the trends when it comes to this. Also, just attended the biggest HR conference in the world back in June in New Orleans, where about 20,000 HR people were there. The majority of the content was around hybrid working, attracting staff in a tight market, and then retaining them. So the way I look at this is if you really need to manage your culture, and it fixes a lot of those different things there. But the hybrid working is incredibly important to consider when you think about your managers. And if your managers aren't 10 out of 10, and all of a sudden they're thrown into a hybrid working scenario, it does really highlight the downfalls in your middle management. Because not having people in front of you is more difficult, and you really need to be deliberate about getting there and managing them. And there's a whole lot of different ways to do that, but I think the sustainable culture is a good framework to run over the top. Surface culture, really important. I'm not saying discount this at all. It's a massive part in attracting and keeping your people. The trap with surface culture is if you're not changing it up all the time, it becomes a given and you lose its value, right? So, you know, that drinks on a Friday night, if it's been happening for the last few years the same way, it becomes the baseline now. So you've got to provide something else. So you've got to think of like, maybe we change that up, maybe we do something a little bit different, maybe we add something. But that surface culture stuff is all about just continual movement with the surface culture. Important, but I think about 20% worth of your focus should be put on the surface culture work, and then about 80% of your focus on that sustainable culture. So be really deliberate about it and really look at how you're traveling, and be honest with yourself about how you're traveling across those 3 different pillars. Because if there's anything to focus on at the moment in small business, it's retaining your current good staff. Because if they're not getting 3 or 4 offers a week by corporates, which is happening with across the market in just about every industry, you know, if you're not hearing about it, it's probably happening anyway. So just get out there and be proactive, be deliberate, and then look at how you can develop your culture moving forward and really sustain it and continue to improve it. But if you can define it and measure it, it's going to be something you can work on and have discussed in boardroom discussions. And that is about it. So yeah, happy to answer any HR questions that you guys have got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Lots of content in there and lots to think about as per usual with this topic. I love all the sticky questions that come out. We've got to hear from 3 people. Ronnie, did you want to articulate a bit further your questions that you've popped in the chat there or haven't been answered yet?
So I'm fairly good. I mean, thanks for taking those questions on board, Ben. I've made some notes around mine, so I'm fairly good. I'm happy to hand over to someone else.
Okay, too easy. Adam, you had the next one. Do you want to articulate that for me, please?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, Ben. It's been really, really valuable. Just with, we've got HR sort of covered in terms of a really good external HR and internal, but the problem that we've got with our records are everywhere. So some in Outlook, some in folders, some in text. So is there a software that will bring them together just for recording?
There's a number of different softwares. Yeah, there's a number of different HR platforms. It's still difficult though, right? Because people are taking them at all different levels of your business. So I think it's more around training your managers that are, or anyone who actually has people reporting to them about where you want them sitting. So them really understanding where it is. And the way I look at it is if they always go through the lens, if I ever had to defend this action, do I have anything here to support why I made it? Like if they're thinking that way, they should be always filing a few notes, even thought patterns that they're going through when they're having meetings with people. Because we see it time and time again. If people can't find it, or they say, oh, we've talked about it, or I've written it somewhere, it's more around training of where you want it sitting. So whether it's on an employment file, whether it's sitting in some type of file in SharePoint. We're actually developing a platform at the moment that sits on top of Microsoft and links a lot of this stuff together, and it files things into SharePoint on purpose. Also books meetings and things. It's not quite ready yet, but it's almost there, and it sits on top of the system, which is cool because it does keep everything together. But yeah, when you've got internal HR and external and line managers, you really need to train them, I think, of why they're doing it to start with, the reasons behind it, so they really get it, so they're motivated to look after that information, and then even giving them some examples of when you don't have it, what sort of scenario you can be in. We do a bit of that training as well.
All right, thanks, Ben.
If anyone does use any HR platforms and software and whatnot, do you want to just pop them in the chat? You might be using something already. That would be really handy. Lindsay also had a question around the same type of thing. Lindsay, do you want to articulate any further?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for your time. And similar to what Adam was just saying, we use Employment Hero, which is kind of fine. It does some things well. In fact, Adam, it actually pins a lot of records to individual files quite well, and also has a bunch of templates that you can use as a basis, which has been quite useful in a smaller business context, and not large organization. And I guess ultimately any software is only as good as the people that use it.
Yeah, that's the issue.
But just, and maybe it's the answer is no, but we just find it, we're still paying whatever it is per user per month for a software that's kind of half good. And, it does some things well, record management but in terms of our allocation of EOS rocks and then down into, and how KPIs differ from rocks, it's just painful. It just it's not customizable and it just doesn't work for us. So I just thought if you had any recommendations of software where you sort of say, absolutely, this is amazing, have a look at it. Otherwise, I think we just keep limping through.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I did. But it's, Enable HR, Employment Hero, all of these ones are kind of good for small business, but they're only as good as how much you use them, the same with CRM, same with all of this stuff. We find the best results of really just getting the people that have staff reporting to them, understanding the importance, and then teaching them where to put it. But if they get the importance, they'll put it in the right place. I think that's your best way to look at it, regardless of what system you've got. And sometimes the way is to tell some of the stories of where that's fallen over, because that can really hurt, right?
Fear tactics, I like it.
Yeah, it is a fear tactics, but they're real stories, right? Real stories without the names of the businesses.
Yep.
The horror stories. Sometimes that just gets people to go, right, okay. Because I've heard it my whole life, write notes down, keep notes, all this stuff. And it gets a bit blasé, but when you see what happens when you don't, that can really sting.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
I think it might be also worthwhile, to pop that question on our Facebook page for EO Queensland. We've got a wealth of knowledge on there as well, so please feel free to use that too. Cool. There's no other questions in there, but if anyone else has got anything that's popped to mind, then please holler at us. You're welcome to. Otherwise, it's over to you again, Ben.
Yeah, no worries. That's basically it from me. If anyone wants to come directly, happy to answer any questions, any HR questions outside of this as well, of course. But I really, if you can take this back into your workplace and just have a think about it, I think it at least gets managers thinking about putting something to their mind to actually go and work towards deliberately to improve a culture. I think a lot of it, we end up looking at culture as being something that just evolves, whereas this, you can actually be quite deliberate at building it out if you think it through. And hopefully there's some takeaways.
Sorry, Ben, can you just articulate again, what is our deal as our strategic alliance partner, what your offer is to our members?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not actually sure what my offer is to members, but essentially for all of our clients, we always have an hour meeting to chat through any scenario. Happy to answer anything over the phone. We work from everything from ad hoc hourly support to projects, point A to point B, to retained sort of, we can be your HR department and everything in between. So happy to assist. It's not always good to hire all of the HR stuff, talent internally. It's very expensive. So having access to experience outside of the workplace is handy. And it definitely is handy for small to medium business, and happy to assist anywhere.
Awesome. Happy days. Thank you so much for your time, Ben. Always thoroughly enjoy your expertise and hearing all the nitty grittiness. I feel like it's just an industry that moves and shakes so quickly. So to have someone as our strategic alliance partner to keep our finger on the pulse is incredible. Thank you so much.
No worries. My pleasure.
Jody, anything else from you?
Do you just want to give people a reminder of the upcoming events?
Oh, yep. That's where I come in. Ooh, okay, we have Scaling Up Cash Day is on the 3rd of August. We've also got a fireside chat with Tim Russell on the 4th of August, and Jack Daly has been launched. The invite came out yesterday on the 30th of August. He is an incredible speaker and definitely not one to be missed. So please jump on to the EO Network site, otherwise in your text messages or in the 50 emails that are sent out to you. Definitely all those invites and registrations will be in there. Happy days. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate it.